Live Letter Part 88 gave us a nice look through the window at Christmas at what we can expect for the 7.35 patch in the future. The main thing to get excited for in the 7.35 patch, in my opinion, is the new Deep Dungeon. By the way, a 0.35 patch is usually 1 to 2 months after the main patch, and since 7.3 comes out on the 5th of August, we can expect probably this release for 7.35 for late September or early October, just to give you a bit of context about what we're talking about. So a lot could change from now to the actual release. The Deep Dungeon this time around is called Pilgrim's Traverse, set in the rolling hills of Ilmeg on the First from the Shadowbringers expansion. The dungeon looks, as you would imagine, lots of floral, bright areas filled with fairy magic and fairy folk alike, but as we saw on the 88th letter from a producer live, also the denizens of some darker toned areas and even darker creatures as you seem to go further inside with the floors. Bosses include more suitable Ilmeg creatures as you would expect, such as these rainbow leaf men they showed off, which is amazing. That's also a mount, by the way. Tree things, which is also a mount they showed off, and more of the same that you can imagine, lots of fey creatures, but also sin eaters. So they showed this picture. Left to exist unaffected by the plot and events of Shadowbringers, there are still Sin Eaters lurking, and it seems the Deep Dungeon has some of them as bosses, which is pretty exciting to deal with as a threat and is probably part of the storyline. As usual, you traverse multiple floors through a Deep Dungeon that are generated procedurally from various tile sets, looting treasure boxes and gaining power and levels for your character to defeat bosses every 10 floors. There are 100 floors in total again, with the final boss at level 99. Before then, you had cut-off points for checkpoints. It was floor 1 to queue obviously into it, and also floor 21 with the obvious quest ending around level 30. So this time around we have new checkpoints. So if you mess up, for example, on floor 99 and wiped the boss, you would actually only have to queue back in from floor 71 now, which is insane in my opinion. The checkpoints are 1, 21, 31, 51 and 71, which means once you get past those points, you can obviously queue in from them again, giving you an easier way to get this cleared and an easier time on your time constraints maybe, which has always been a bit of a factor socially when you're trying to get people together to do this for hours on end just to wipe. The realization then sets in that where you wiped, it's always quite daunting to get back to and you're probably done for the day, but I guess not really anymore. That's not going to be something that really comes to mind. To be clear, before I read about the rest of the Deep Dungeon in this presentation, this one slide made me quite upset. I really like the challenge of working towards certain floors without that crutch of being able to restart much later into the dungeon, but after I did finish seeing the full presentation, I was much more excited for the thing that unlocks after completing the floors that we'll talk about just in a sec, but yeah, I think you should probably judge it later rather than how I judged it immediately when I saw the slide, because I thought it was absolute bollocks. But yeah, it gets better. It does actually get better. So you'll be able to earn experience to level up your jobs that you take inside if you have some still to level. And you can do the usual exchange of accursed horde loot you find and other types of loot to get cool new rewards from the vendors outside. As you can see, these are some of the items. They're pretty nice this time. We've got glamour sets, we've got emotes, we've got mounts, we've got minions, framers kits, orchestrion rolls, and probably a lot of other items from other older content that's been added to the gacha. Usually materia drops and fireworks is what I end up getting. I don't know if you're like me with RNG, but I'm awful at getting it. And my friends always like, I got the mount first time. And that's the ongoing sort of meme with me, is that they get it on the first time and then it takes, you know, me a few weeks to actually get the same thing. So, and at that point, it's usually cheaper on a market board. But yeah, that's how my RNG goes. How's yours? You'll still be able to clear all 100 floors solo, they confirmed. If you desire this in particular, there will still be rankings and titles like before with the other Deep Dungeon. So if that's your thing, it's not gone anywhere. You'll still be able to have your exclusive title, such as Necromancer, things like that. The new features of a Deep Dungeon then inside for the various floors include these new votives, which are pretty cool. They're basically like these candle holders that you sometimes see. You can click on these if you choose, and they either give you really good RNG or bad RNG. And there's a various number of effects that can affect the next floor. So they don't affect you immediately. They affect your next floor with a big question mark. They use the example on the slide of increasing the amount of traps for the next floor or hiding your map as a negative type. There's going to be obviously much more than that, which sound pretty annoying. And there's also the example of transforming your party into powerful monsters to help clear the next floor, or regen that gets applied to your party members. But I'm more worried about some of the negatives, and you know, if it's anything like the other commanders, you know, you can imagine there's going to be lots of mines, basically. Let's put it that way. There's going to be lots of traps, isn't there? As usual, you do have your commanders that you're used to, so items you find in gold chests, those are commanders usually, and you can use them to recover, you know, discover all the traps, for example, show them on the actual screen, find accursed hordes, which will be even more important. We'll get to the currencies in a moment. Affect the monsters on the floor, like weaken them, and much like any other deep dungeon, so there'll be lots of ways to deal with different floors and different tactics, which is pretty cool. And much like with the others, we get new special commanders, so similar to the Magicite system, etc. They're called Juniper Incense this time. It actually summons Fail Ul, so Titania, and her power to our side to take care of various floors. We saw in the live letter one of these seems to give some kind of buff. I don't know what that does. One that seems to raise your maximum HP, and one that also destroys everything on a current floor. So a little bit like Ifrit, for example. Very cool stuff, but stuff we're used to by now. We also got a sneak peek at the Etherpool gear, or at least of what some of it looks like. If you don't know, usually with a deep dungeon there are two sets of weapons that exist. One for lower Etherpool armor as you're going through the floors, which I believe this image is actually representing. For example, with Palace of the Dead, this was anything below 60 armor, and beyond that number, anything above 60 armor, you got your keener weapons, right? So your red versions, red glowies. You could, of course, exchange Etherpool for physical grip items outside all of the other deep dungeons, and then you could eventually get the same weapon physically outside the dungeon in the normal world. So it's pretty much certain that the same thing's going to happen here, and there'll probably be a different colored version of whatever the stained glass will look like on upper floors. So if this is indeed the lower floor version, which I'm guessing it is, with that kind of Fey culture sort of flowing through it, I can imagine anything above like the 60 Etherpool mark will probably start looking a bit Sin Eatery, and you can imagine the sorts of designs you could get with Sin Eater glass stained stuff. It could be really, really cool. So yeah, very excited for that. And yeah, so your first quest for the content finishes after defeating the floor 30 boss. That shouldn't be anything too unfamiliar with you if you've done other deep dungeons. But unlike the old deep dungeons that would force you to find friends to create a fixed party, this one actually allows you to queue matched parties in the duty finder all the way to floor 100. So if you're the sort of person that goes, I don't want to do it solo and I don't have friends, I guess I'm not doing it. Well, it turns out you can use the duty finder. So all the way up to floor 100 and the boss itself. So yeah, this time it's a lot easier, more accessible, right, in terms of getting in there. There are a couple of reasons they gave for this change directly. Firstly, they said to make it more accessible to more players who normally wouldn't bother with the floors beyond the story ones that they could queue for, but also because of a new reward system that gives you new currency items as part of the challenge log for doing set numbers of floors in matchmaking each week, and the rewards for that currency are pretty good. We'll get to those in a second. So to explain currencies, we have quite a few. Firstly, we've got luminous oil, which is a currency that can be exchanged for various rewards. They don't say what exactly. We've got blessed horde pieces. They seem to be something you can only really get from challenge log or the actual final boss, which is interesting, which is in a special dungeon we'll talk about in a second. There are also accursed horde pieces as usual, which are from finding accursed hordes inside various floors of a dungeon. You can use those gacha style on the NPC to get, materia, fireworks, or something useful. Usually fireworks though. And there are also illumined Etherpool glass fragments, and these will also have their own rewards that you can exchange for, which apparently include, as they say on this slide, medical kits that can be used inside the deep dungeon, so ways of healing, but also things like framers kits. So quite a variety of items from different currencies this time to collect. And yeah, it's going to be a lot more social than it ever used to be, obviously with the queuing system. So as you can see on their graph, certain sets will be giving you rewards upon completion, and these are obviously doable solo with your friends or in matched parties up to 4, and you can queue if you reach and defeat the floors in question. So you can do this in matchmaking, through Party Finder, alone, or with your friends. And once you reach floor 99 and you defeat the boss there'll be a boss on floor 99, you will, as usual, get yourself your rewards, and you'll be able to get to floor 100, where it's basically a nice place to, victory lap and take pictures and stuff, and flex on the internet that you finished it. But this will also unlock a new dungeon as part of a quest. So once you've done there, you go back to the NPCs, and there'll be a quest for the final verse, which is a new challenge. Presumably this will be a trial that's queuable now, entirely centered around giving you an extra test of strength. You can speak to an NPC to queue for it with the prerequisite of finishing the deep dungeon and the quest unlocked from it. So you can do this 1 to 4 players, and this is how you get your juicy loot. In the past, because of how obvious difficult it has been in deep dungeons, being put into those normal last floor bosses, and the task of getting to that final boss with so few checkpoints and queuing points, you actually got some pretty unique rewards. Eureka Orthos, for example, one of my favorite mounts in the game, was given the Eterna by completing all floors 4 times, for example. Really cool mount, really exclusive, at least I think so. So it's likely that we can expect a similar quality reward to be locked behind the final verse instead of the deep dungeon itself, if that makes sense. Seems to have been made more accessible, that deep dungeon, and therefore any rewards from it are probably much easier to get. There was also mention of market board trading for some of that stuff, so it's likely that, that's kind of like the basic mode, and then when you unlock the final verse, it gets real. So it's likely, if you want those exclusive rewards, you need to do your harder dungeon. The best thing about it, though, is that regardless of any difficulty increase, you can queue for it directly rather than wade through all 100 floors each time. This I actually really like, especially with the time needed to usually set aside with my friends to do a complete run of like Eureka Orthos, for example. It would be hours and hours and hours, and trying to find a day where somebody was off work for, more than 4 hours or something. These things can take like a couple of hours if you're good and you're used to it, and many, many more if you're not used to it or bad, like we were. So that's a welcome addition in my opinion. The thing on this slide that you might notice is, quote, valuable rewards may drop on rare occasions, end quote. And yeah, you'd be right. With the ease of queuing comes the pain of RNG when it's defeated, because that exclusivity is something they still want to remain intact for a lot of the harder to get items. And they have an answer for that too. If you don't want to just do that normal mode and deal with RNG BS, you can actually have a greater challenge. And there's a mode called Quantum Mode, and it's called the Quantum Final Verse, which is a much more painful mode of that same boss. You can queue for this as well once you finish all 100 floors of a deep dungeon, have done the quest that also unlocks that normal final verse as well. But Quantum is also unlocked, And you can kind of sort of see this as the extreme mode version, right? There's a step up in difficulty. However, it can be much harder if you want it to than even that. So let's explain this in really basic terms. Okay, you've completed the final quest after defeating all 100 floors. You've got your photos. You're feeling pretty cool. You will be given a series of items called offerings. These will amass to a total of 40 that you get from that final quest completion. You're like, what are these 40 things? Offerings are then used in quantum mode at the start to change the way that the boss behaves. You need at least 15 offerings to actually get the fight to start in quantum mode. You cannot fight it with less than 15 offerings given or offered. These offerings, however, do not get consumed by just queuing. They only delete themselves from your inventory if you clear the content. So if you go in, fail, you get them all back. This is to actually encourage you to give it a go then on this harder difficulty and not worry about loss and having to recoup those losses. These are also tradable items, these offerings. They're also market saleable, and you can also get more from going back and getting more accursed hordes from inside the various deep dungeon floors, making replayability something to consider for future clears. And of course, that ties into their mantra of wanting to do challenge rewards on your challenge log each week. Each offering then does something different. We don't currently know what this is, they didn't tell us, but I'm sure that that will be made into various online guides for the content as that patch comes out. We do know that 5 types exist. There's sacramental spirits, spices, grain, light, and lilies. When you want to challenge the final verse quantum, you can put a maximum of 8 of any type of those. So you can't just put in 15 spirits, for example. It'd be a maximum of 8. And the reason for this is that you can put a total of 40 offerings into the boss if you want to. But that is perhaps not a good idea, depending on your idea of a challenge or fun. These graphs then show what happens with different contributions of offerings. You can see that each offering does actually change the boss in some way. Be that more of one type increases to, like the boss's HP increases. So perhaps that's not the best if you want your DPS to have an easier time. One makes the boss do more light element damage, more physical damage, for example. The graph over on the right, though, that shows what we call the Pentagon of Death. This is what happens if 40 offerings are used, and Yoshi P compared this mode to an ultimate. Yes, it is supposed to be 4-player ultimate mode difficulty. You see, for every offering that you put in, it doesn't just affect how much damage the light attack does, for example, or how hard physical hits smash you for. They also affect the boss mechanics. So for the first time ever in this game, we have a boss that is actually many different bosses in a trench coat, depending on how hard you and your friends decide to make it with your offerings. And because you only lose those offerings if you somehow manage to kill it, then you are encouraged to go absolutely crazy with it and try it out, which I think is absolutely awesome. I don't think it would have been the same feeling if you lost those every attempt. That would be a slog. And hopefully it stays this way for the future. I really like the idea of just, throwing eggs at a wall and seeing how difficult something is, see what sticks. But if you do manage to clear it, that's going to be awesome. So whether you want a kind of extreme-ish difficulty encounter with your 15 offerings, which is totally fine, you still have RNG, on those drops, or an ultimate with 40 submitted, or somewhere in between. Obviously, you can comfortably find your comfy zone with no loss and find the right sweet spot for your group if you're in one. They do, however, say the more offerings used increases the guarantee of certain loot, and if you use 40 offerings, you'll get a unique achievement and title for that accomplishment. They didn't mention anything beyond that, mount related or anything like that. So unique title and achievement. So it really is kind of like doing an ultimate, you're getting something kind of cool out of it. Who knows what that title will be? Hopefully it's pretty flashy. In this way, Creative Unit 3, in my opinion, has given us a world first race for 4-player content. as they said, they want a world first race for it, as well as giving more casual players who would never touch the content free reign to get addicted to that deep dungeon. It's a much easier accessibility point, you know, potentially easier through the early floors. It's supposed to still have the same ramping, you know, one-shot mechanics and things, but obviously a much later into the dungeon, like past floor 31. But it gives them the encouragement to clear it and then give this a go with no penalty outside of that quick queuing, which is really nice. And I think more content should be, especially like the boss, having that scalable difficulty with better rewards is really interesting. And I think they should have done that, obviously, with a Court Crescent. It would have been nice if that had a similar sort of system, like queuing outside of the content that it's in. I think it's pretty important to increase accessibility and manage the time expectations of your player base, right? So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it is. But yeah, let me know what you think about this. If it's as good as it reads, you know, on these slides in action, then this could be seriously a great deep dungeon and bring a lot of new people into content they wouldn't normally. A great new formula for the content going forward in the game. Or it could be complete and utter bleh, but I'm not a fortune teller. Let me know what you think about it. I think player engagement is in content is split with most patches. It seems Naoki Yoshida seems to think the same. As you probably saw in the live letter, he mentioned basically the same thing, with a new emphasis then on giving more people access to different ways to play the same content, instead of leaving any one particular type of player out. Increasing that accessibility, but still maintaining those challenges for people who want to seek them out and rewarding those people. That's the important thing. We don't want the game to be oversimplified just for the sake of accessibility without there being something else placed there for people who want that harder mode and to be, you know, to feel like they've accomplished something. So I'm happy if it is exactly how they've put it. We'll have to wait and see, but this could be some of the best deep dungeon content they've done. I love deep dungeons. I think they're fantastic. I would advise anyone to go and do like Heaven on High, Eureka Orphos, and if you really, really want to, you know, beat yourself up, go do Palace of the Dead, because that's even more floors. And yeah, it's a much bigger achievement to get like Necromancer and things, but holy moly. Definitely excited for 7.35. There's a few bits, obviously, in 7.3 I'm excited for, but that is the patch for me. Very excited for that. Anyway, much love. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully that helped give a better sort of impression of what to expect with, you know, this new deep dungeon. It's just the waiting is going to kill me now. Much love, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.